The Hershey-Chase experiment was conducted in 1952. The end result was that it identified DNA to be the genetic material of phages and of all organisms. Prior to this, the belief was that proteins were the genetic material in viruses and not DNA. This is a structural overview of the T2 phages that infect the bacteria. The bottle represents the protein coat and the water represents the genetic material. This piece of foil represents the radioactive 35S infected protein. The bottle represents the T2 phage infected with radioactive 35S infected protein.
2P.
This represents the 32P radioactive DNA. This represents the T2 phage with radioactive 32P labeled DNA. The capsule represents the bacteria in which the phages infect.
Hey Martha, it's our experiment!
Yeah, those were the good days. I remember when we used phages infected with radioactive 35S labeled protein codes. We used the phages infected with the radioactive 35S labeled protein codes to determine if protein is the genetic material of a phage. Later, we infected the bacteria with the T2 phages. When the phage created by the bacteria did not contain radioactive 35S protein, it was obvious that the protein was not the genetic material of phages and thus does not transmit genetic material.
For the next part of the experiment, we used radioactive 32P to infect the DNA of the phages. We used the radioactive 32P labeled DNA T2 phages to infect the bacteria. The phage injects its genetic material into the bacteria and the emptied protein coat falls off. The fact that the phages created inside the bacteria contained radioactive 32P labeled DNA shows that the DNA, not the protein, is the genetic material of the phages.
Overall, the 1952 Hershey-Chase experiment determined DNA was the genetic material in viruses by using infected bacteria with T2 radioactive 35S labeled protein coated phages to determine that the protein coats were not the genetic material because they were not present in the bacteria. Then, by using radioactive 32P labeled DNA, they were able to conclude that DNA is in fact the molecule of heredity.